What's up, guys? Zakk here from MixChecks.com. Today we're going to be doing a mix breakdown of a song called Draw Near by Words Aren't Enough. It's a live recording and it's actually a cover of a Jeremy Riddle song, but we're going to be breaking it down track by track so you can hear my plug-in chains that I'm using to get this mix. And then if you like this mix breakdown and you want to see from start to finish how it was done, you can move on to the live mixing session and see it in even more detail. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Okay, let's dive right into this mix. First, I'm just going to let you hear some of the mix so you can get an idea of what it sounds like as a whole, and then we'll go through each part and break it all down. Back it up a little bit. I'm going to fast forward to the good part real quick, if I can find it. A place for you here, so come on, come on. All things are possible here, so come on, come on. Little drum solo. A place for you here. So come on, come on. Don't have it See, I made a place for you, yeah. Okay, so real quick, you can see that the Plugin Alliance SSL E console is pretty much on every single track, and that's just to give it that analog feel. I saw Chris Lord Algae do it with the Waves SSL, so I figured I'd try it too. And Plugin Alliance actually gives you this random channel to where if you put it on each channel, then you hit this random all button and it models a different actual channel on an actual SSL. So it's not using the same model of the same channel strip over and over again, which is a really cool feature from Plugin Alliance if you're in the market for an SSL or any sort of channel strip. But real quick, I'm going to solo the drum bus and let you hear what that sounds like, and then we can break it down even further. Okay, so on the drum bus we have the SSL, we actually have the Townhouse compressor from Plugin Alliance. So this is a super awesome compressor. It's a little noisy, so if you have room to hide that noise, then it's a great compressor. But you can see it's just taken off a little bit. And just really adds that punch to the drums. And then if we move down to just the kick, What I do on the kick drum is I just take a duplicate of the actual kick track and I make one my sub kick so I can process it differently, and I make one my top kick so I can process that a little bit differently. So on the top kick, it sounds like this. Then we have the SSL channel going. Pretty big high-end boost at 8K. A little bit of a cut at 520. And then another little cut at 250. And it's also being compressed on the SSL. We just got the 3 dB lighting up, and then it's being compressed a little bit more with just the stock Logic compressor. So let me bypass these. Then let's add in the sub kick. And what I do on the sub kick is number one, filter out all the bass, boost it up around 50, 60, where I like that thump. And then after that, we just really smash it with the compressor to make sure it's nice and even and consistent. Just because I want that low end not to be wobbly, and I don't want it to, negatively affect the low end of my mix as a whole. I want it to be nice and consistent and flat. And then the character comes from the actual top kick. Then moving on to the snare. So that has the SSL on it. Another big, huge boost. This is just the stock frequency that the SSL comes at, around 8K. Doing some filtering. The SSL compression again. I just really like the way the SSL compressor sounds, the channel strip compressor. It's just really nice and punchy and works good for drums. And then on the snare, doing a little bit of a boost at 155 to get that low end. And actually on this track, I didn't end up using any drum triggering at all. This is all the raw recorded drums, no snare bottom mic, didn't need it. So that is the snare sound. And we can move on to the toms. There's actually a good section, drum solo section for the toms right here. A place for you. Another big boost at 8K, some mid cuts to get that scooped tom sound. And that'll be pretty much the same on both of them. And you can see I had to do an extra channel EQ to just scoop those mids even more. Oh, that was the overheads. Whoops. So yeah, there's big scoops. And then moving on to the overheads. You can hear that they're just super scooped. I mean, they're super high passed. So they're filtered on this SSL strip all the way up to almost to 300, but just 268. And then there is another EQ to filter out some of those harsh frequencies that just bother me on cymbals. So I can bypass this and let you hear what it sounds like. You can just hear it really cut out some of those, I call them whistly frequencies that just tend to bother me on all overhead tracks. And then I had to scoop out a little bit more highs because they were kind of harsh in the mix as a whole. And I think that was actually a tweak that I went back and did after, you know, car checking it and that stuff. And then let's move on to the bass. You can see that this is being smashed super hard if you look at the Logic compressor gain reduction meter, but this is running through Brainworks SVT Pro amp sim for bass. The gain is cranked all the way up. And then you can see those settings. The treble is boosted a little bit. Tube gains all the way up. Just trying to get a really nice gritty, you know, worship bass sound. It's also running through the SSL. This one has the low pass filter on all the way up. And pretty flat on the EQ. Not really doing much with this EQ. It's mostly just for to add to that analog character of the mix as a whole. And then the actual EQ is coming here. So you can see I cut around 50 to leave room for the kick. Give it a little boost at around 100 because that's where I want my bass to actually sit in the mix. Then some scooped mids, some high frequencies that were bothering me, and then just an overall high roll off to just get out the stuff that you don't need way up there on the bass. And then let's move on to the guitars. So this first guitar is the guitar that was actually recorded there live from Tim, the guitar player and singer. He sings and plays at the same time. The second one, just so we could have a second guitar and get that stereo image, we came back after the fact and recorded it DI because we knew we were just going to run it through an amp sim. And so here's the first guitar. And then you can see on that, just using the filters on the SSL and the compressor. Actual EQ, it's coming from here. Had to notch out some more harsh frequencies that just were bothering me on this guitar. It was a mic'd guitar amp. And then just boosting kind of the mids overall to help them kind of cut through the mix, rolling off everything we don't need in the bottom end, letting the, you know, bass and kick fill that space. And then moving on to the actual amp sim guitar. This is just using the Nolly from Neural DSP. It's on there, so like as you go through these different gain settings down here, or different amps, it's basically they get higher and higher gain. And so I put this one on the lowest, you know, just for worship. It had enough grit if whenever I cranked the gain all the way up on the lowest gain amp. So you can hear this one by itself. On this one, I'm actually doing the EQ with the SSL. Got my filters set up, boosting a little bit around 1.4 to get those mids to cut through like I did on the other guitar. Just on this one, I use the SSL EQ to do it. And then also the SSL compressor. And so this is what they sound like together. And then the last instrument is the synth. You know, pretty much in every worship song, you got to have an ambient synth going on, especially in modern worship. So there's usually not much you have to do to a synth other than just cut out all the stuff you don't need. So you really don't want it to take up that low end. So this one's being filtered with the SSL all the way to the top. Just because a lot of synth pads do have that low end down there, and if you're just staying on it, it'll crazy screw up your mix, especially with the bass and the kick and the guitars and basically everything. So you got to filter that stuff. You can usually filter out the highs too if you have to, because usually they're using a filter on the actual synth itself, but you can still do it with your filters. I didn't do it on this one because he was actually adjusting it during the mix. So like on the more bigger parts, he would adjust that filter on his actual synth and then bring them back down for the verses and stuff like that. But you can see I'm cutting some of the mids to scoop out some room for the vocals to sit. And then that's pretty much it on this particular synth. And it was just a pad the whole time. Gosh, I keep hitting in. And actually, did I make this a bus? Yep. So I sent the synth to a bus, and on this bus, I'm actually using the real ADT to make it wider. It was a stereo synth, but I don't know, I just wanted it to be even wider than it sounded, so you can hear what the difference is with no ADT. So yeah, you can just hear that really spaces it out and makes some room for us in the middle, where we can put our vocals and kick and snare, get a nice big mix. So that's the synth. And then after that, we move on to the vocals. Or actually, we can go through the room sound. So you can see this bus 3 is going to this room channel. The biggest regret I had from this actual live recording is that there was no room mics, which would have been way better. But since we didn't have room mics, we made our own room, just using Space Designer from Logic. Bump up the pre-delay to, let the dry stuff come through so it can still sound forward. And then you can see we're using the small church setting, figured it was fitting for a worship recording. Wet cranked all the way up, and then something I always do to reduce just mix muddiness is EQ the reverb. So I filter out the highs, filter out the lows, scoop some of the low mids, and that's how I get my reverb sounds. I pretty much always do this. It just really can clean up a mix. And so that's the room sound. Let's see if I can just mute it for you here. So come on, yeah, I mean, hopefully you can hear the difference that makes. Just adds to that ambience of a worship track. And then finally we have the vocals. So this is my pretty standard vocal chain right now. It's using a lot of the R plugins from Waves. So also running these through the SSLs, not really doing much. Going into Melodyne, standard for tuning. Also doing the auto pitch correction from Logic to just catch, some of those other notes. And then starts off my R plugin chain. So run it into the de-esser first, REQ after that. And this is the female vocal. And you can hear that more in the beginning. Let's see if I can find it. So then after that, it goes into 2 R compressors. The first one is at 2-to-1. Second one is at 4-to-1. And I just love the sound of serial compression. It's always sounded super smooth to me, usually knocking off about 6 dB on each one. And I don't know, I've always liked the way it sounds. On this particular one, I'm using the smooth setting from the R compressor. So every now and then I'll swap back and forth on smooth and warm depending on the song. But on this particular one, I picked smooth. And so let's see. To you. And then it's the same thing on the male vocal, but just the EQ is a tad bit different. So you can see on her, I had to boost a little bit more of the highs. On him, they were just more evened out. And then also there was a kind of a nasally frequency I wanted to get out, so I used this second EQ from Logic to try and tame that a little bit. To respond to you, sing all my love. And then you can see the vocal reverb. I'm actually just using the R-verb from Waves. Just the default Hall setting, and then I always they actually have an EQ built into to the R-verb, so I do my EQing in here. I don't have to use a second one after the fact. Bumping up the pre-delay, don't have to change much else. And then also the vocals are being sent to a stereo delay from Logic, so it kind of gives that ping-pong effect. And that is pretty much it for the mix as it goes. And then next is the actual master bus processing. So first we have the dangerous EQ. It's kind of doing a little bit of a high-end boost. It's pretty gradual, as you should do on your master bus. So it's boosting almost 3 dB. It's a shelf. I just like this EQ. It's nice and clean sounding. And then from there, it's going into a compressor that's only taking off like half of a dB. Adds a little bit of a smoothness layer to it. Then from there, it's going into the Shadow Hills compressor, which is taking off more. It's running through the optical and the discrete. And this one, I've also have the stereo width. It has a stereo width knob on it. It's boosted up to 110%. We like to give that extra effort to our mixes. And then it's also on this middle iron setting. To me, that one just sounds the best out of these 3 different metals. So That's the one I always go with. From there, going into the multipressor, so some multiband compression in Logic. And then finally just adding some loudness with the adaptive limiter in Logic and just hitting it pretty hard. I'll let you see the loudness meter too. And that's pretty much the whole program. So if you want to watch me actually mix this in Logic, just as I'm going through, you can move on to the live mixing session videos on this channel. You can see other worship recording mixes we've done. You can see rock mixes, even have some gospel mixes on here. So feel free to check it out. Check us out on MixChecks.com if you want to get some feedback on your mixes. I'm always on there listening to mixes and seeing what I hear. So that's something for you to do. And if not, then we'll see you in the next mix and next video. See ya.